Welcome back to the bi-monthly conversations with Konstantin, one of the most respected voices on YouTube about what's happening inside Russia and especially on the energy market, the economy, and so on. And I wanted to say my gratitude to you for joining our live stream last week. I know that was sort of actually some of it was quite unplanned entirely because we didn't know, that there were going to be a bunch of people on screen, and I just thought it was extraordinary the way you handled that. With the sort of sensitivity and sort of authority you brought to that. So thanks so much for coming on that effort last week.
Thank you very much for having me. Great to see you, Jonathan. It was very difficult live stream and difficult conversation last week.
And it
This is
completely
life.
not planned for the audience there. I mean, it had no idea that that I thought it was just going to be Yuri and you and myself. And of course, I didn't warn, my delightful Ukrainian guest either. But she sort of joined early, and but I think the conversation was incredibly moving and powerful, and I wanted to thank you for that experience.
Thank you. I am very grateful she didn't pick up virtual rocks and started throwing at me, So
In
thank you.
fact, she showed a high degree of gratitude and actually awareness of the materials and what you're doing. So I think that emphasizes actually how important this is. And I do meet a lot of Ukrainians here who do actually follow your work and aware of your work as well. So I think hopefully that process of reconciliation will take generations, but I think you're one of the few people who have taken a positive step towards that. So that's to be applauded. Well, let's jump into the economy because all sorts of extraordinary things are happening. Let's start with this news, and I haven't really, got into the detail yet, but it seems that just a few hours ago, the UK declared that Russian oil is off the market, and we've seen a significant step change in the sanctions against the Rosneft and Lukoil, who of course are the cornerstones of the Russian oil market. What's your understanding there? How significant is this, and what are the implications?
Very significant. It's another hit to Russian economy. Well, actually to Putin's regime, really, because it's based on oil trade, fossil fuel exports. We've discussed it quite a few times here at Silicon Curtain during our conversations. You know, um, this is the cumulative effect. The compound interest rate, only it's not interest rate, compound sanctions pressure. As Albert Einstein said once that the most powerful or mystical force in the universe is the compound interest. And this is the sanctions, the effects are compounding. And that's another blow, a big one. And that just assures me again that we are seeing the final chapter of the regime. I don't know whether we are in the beginning of the chapter or we have moved towards the middle, towards the end. That I'm not sure, but I am sure this is it.
And it's a wonder, isn't it, what operations they're still running? I mean, certainly some European countries were still buying oil, but oil had gone down substantially. And there's only really, I would say regimes like Hungary and Slovakia that were still showing a desire to really purchase at any significant scale. It's LNG, it's the purchase of Russian gas, which is still a huge problem and which is providing substantial funds to the Russian budget. We're talking here billions, even tens of billions over the lifetime of the military operation. Do you think that by starting to really take oil off the market, the next step really is to comprehensively deal with gas?
Well, the remainings of Russian natural gas, because it's not supplied, currently not supplied at the quantities it was supplied in the past, not even close. Gazprom has just become Russia's biggest company with net loss. Okay, that's the new data. And there are a couple countries that are buying Russian gas, but they are also under pressure. And Hungary started looking for an alternative to Russian gas. They started negotiating with Turkmenistan about, getting gas through pipelines. Jonathan, this is coming to the end. Not too many companies are buying Russian. It's much easier to export oil than gas because gas you need pipeline. It's a weakness and it's strength at the same time. If you have established pipelines going right to your buyers, your customers, then that's great. It's the cheapest way to transport gas, like it was transported for over 4 decades to Germany and to European countries. Okay, it's another thing to export gas via ports, via sea. You need special terminals to liquefy natural gas, which Russia lacks. Okay, there are a couple in the north. They are targeted right now, and it's sanctioned, and it is not much. It's certainly not up to capacity.
We've
It's
seen
much.
extraordinary strikes against Primorsk and other areas of export, and these ports are real at risk of being shut down entirely.
Yes, yes. Primorsk, I believe that's an oil terminal, not liquefied
That's oil.
natural
That's oil,
gas.
isn't it? Yes, you're absolutely right there.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's easier to transport oil because, there are still ways for Russia to ship it by sea, although not too many ports. And each one of them is being targeted by the drones. And there's sanctioned pressure mounting, just like what the UK did a few hours ago. Piece by piece, they are forcing Russia to sell less and well, actually, they're forcing everyone else to buy less and less of Russian oil. We're seeing the export to India dropped, not completely, but a good deal. We are seeing, we're generally seeing the drop of entire export of Russian oil, and um, this is this is it. We're in the final stages. Russia does not export as much as it used to. The Minister of Economic Development came out and warned everyone that Russia should really switch to rely on other income streams, such as taxes to to modernize its economy so it creates more value, sells products, not oil and gas, but products, different products overseas and so forth. Because he warned, he said, look, oil and gas revenues used to amount around 50, at certain years, 50% of Russian federal budget. And now they're 25% off, down to 25%, even 22. And the forecast is negative. So that tells us that Russia has lost its biggest bread maker, fossil fuel exports. We're talking about details right now. That port was attacked by a drone. The sanctions by this country were enacted in that country, but that's just small details. The bigger picture is Russia has lost its major bread maker. And Putin and his group of friends, they've been feeding off that bread maker. Okay.
Mhm.
That's their strength. That's their ring of power. It's vanishing. It's not completely gone, but it's vanishing. It's taken a hit. The power is so much less now. And I think this is what's very important to understand.
Another key industry, of course, is the armaments industry. But of course, this so-called military operation has not been a great advertisement for the quality of the output of the Russian arms industry either. So that's another own goal there. But let's turn to something you mentioned there, which I think is absolutely fascinating, which is switching to taxes. And of course, as just that requires a fundamental systematic change to value-add production. And that's very difficult in the current circumstances where many civilian factories are now having to become dual use so that they can churn out sort of military product. What we're seeing, though, is one, the budget projected for 2026 has been described as a kind of raid on the piggy bank, an increase in taxes to pay for war, not to retool the economy for peace. So this perhaps is another sign that this is going to start to consume everything without building any kind of capability for the future.
You're right on. It's very unwise economic policy. Well, it's actually criminal because you're right. It's destroying Russia's future. They're borrowing from the economy for today, sacrificing the future. Any economist knows that. But that's just another proof that Vladimir Putin and his ministers, his government, and those who back his power, they don't care about Russia's future. They need to politically and physically survive now. For that, they need money now. They're trying to get it in any way possible. They're just sacrificing Russia's future by killing off businesses. Now, at first, it was a very high key interest rate. Corporate credit was 23 to 27%. Then shrinking customer base because disposable income of Russian people is shrinking. High inflation, different kinds of sanctions. And now they are, putting the last nail in small and big businesses' coffins. They are increasing taxes. Well, they have increased taxes already, basically. And every Wednesday, I make another episode of my economic series, Russia's Economic Weekly Review. And that's where I speak exactly of that. And I give examples and from real life. And I'm going to do one today. There are going to be plenty of examples. Russian business owners, especially small ones, they are panicking. There is understanding among a lot of them that they cannot do business any longer with the increased taxes. They added VAT, value added tax. They increased corporate taxes. They increased different fees. This is disaster. I mean, they're finishing Russian economy off. They're finishing independent businesses. Well, I think that the next step would be nationalizing everything in Russia. But I mean, that's not going to work.
Yeah, I've been there, tried that.
Exactly, and it failed incredibly. Okay, with a big boom back in 1991.
And of
Chaos.
course, they've been
What's the
dependent
standard
on.
in
Yeah.
Russia is chaos. It's heading towards chaos very, very, very quickly.
And of course, the sort of tent poles or big foundations of Putin's regime was to have compliant oligarchs, regime loyalists in charge of some very large businesses with which the state had a key interest, either in taxes or a direct stake in those businesses. Well, it seems from the latest data that some of the biggest indebted companies in Russia now are some of these huge enterprises, the big state giants top the rankings of corporate debt. Isn't this another sign of a sort of absolute systemic failure, which is building up pressure, building up strain, which at some point is gonna, tumble out? We can't predict the hour or the day, but all these systemic pressures are building.
I'm going to give you a few names. Gazprom, Rosneft, Российские железные дороги, РЖД,
That's the railway for
Atomenergoprom.
those who. Yeah.
Yes, that's Atomenergoprom is the holding company that owns basically nuclear power generation and market, the industry. N Plus Group, that's Russian aluminum. Rusal, that's for goodness sake, how can you mess up a business that actually produces cheap aluminum and exports it all over the world? Norilsky Nickel, same thing. nickel, one of the largest producer of nickel. You know, it's a
Should be a cash
rare
cow, right?
metal. It has been until recently. It was until recently. Right? I'm speechless. Sibur, you know, the chemical giant of Russia, Avtodor, the company that builds, maintains all the roads in Russia. Um, I gotta tell you, this is another sign that what Putin built in 25 years of his reign is very ineffective. And step by step, he was placing his friends, not necessarily oligarchs, but his servants, as heads of companies, you know, and nationalizing companies, buying. At first, the state started buying these shares from private shareholders, you know, and it acquired controlling packages of shares, um, and they became pockets of Vladimir Putin, you know, wallets, so to speak. And they were functioning well as long as money kept flowing from the federal budget. As soon as the money dried out, and Jonathan, how many times, you know, we've talked about it, you know,
Mm.
money is drying up. Russia is running out of money. Now this is it. Russia is out of money. So there is no more money to flow to these companies. Therefore, there are um, in the list of top unprofitable companies in Russia. This is what state economy is. Like enterprises that rely on federal money, they are not judged by their performance. This is what happens to them as soon as the state stops giving them money.
And at the same
It's
time,
how
there are a lot of greedy people who are rather brutal, who are going to start fighting over whatever is left. That also is happening.
that's the next step. Because before there was plenty of money inside those, you know, Gazprom and Rosneft. How can you mess that up? It's actually unbelievable. So, as long as they had money, things were stable. Putin's mantra, stability. You know, now they are in deep red, and you're absolutely right. There will be fights, all kinds of fights, different ones, political ones, and then they will result in takeovers. And that's the next step. I believe we're going to be seeing a lot of that in 2026.
And then there are sort of complex areas of the economy, ones where some of the more powerful oligarchs not necessarily that interested in more complex businesses. But the taxi industry is one. Actually, cumulatively, it's pretty big, especially if you look at Moscow, St. Petersburg, and some of the sort of second tier kind of cities, that also seems to be at a complete breaking point. You've got the lack of components for vehicles, soaring prices, vehicle costs. If you want to get your vehicle from China, it's going to cost you a lot less for cars which perhaps are not quite got the same cachet as Western brands. And you've got the problem that industry was already quite dependent on migrants. Now they're being what do you call it, verboten, and they're now being sort of dragged into the military operation. There's rising resentment, racism, all sorts of stuff. It's driving migrants out or shutting them out of certain industries. This is a disaster for, those value-add industries such as the taxi industry.
What you described, sending the migrants to the war and racism, those are minor details for taxi industry. The major detail is, well, there are two major details. First is there is a ban in quite a few provinces for non-Russian taxi drivers. Basically, migrants can't hold that job to be taxi cab drivers. And number two, there's a ban on Russian made cars, and I think that's a federal ban. That is, I see that there is someone in charge of these new laws and regulations who has no clue what he or she is doing. absolutely no clue. Uh, everyone in Putin's vertical of power, everyone who holds some kind of a power, um, built in to the vertically integrated system. It means she or he takes orders from the top. So most likely that person received an order to do something, you know, to show some kind of a result, and without much investigation, analysis, without thinking, yeah, let's ban migrant taxi cab drivers, and then they do that. I've done my job. I've cleaned up Russia from migrants. This is one of the biggest problems in Russia right now. It's deporting tens of thousands of migrant workers from Central Asia, and they are blamed for all kinds of troubles in Russia that they do not contribute to. Okay, it's just Russian state needs to find someone to blame for problems of Russian people. That's migrants. So therefore, so many tens of thousands of migrants are deported every month, and many of them are not let to enter Russia. Okay, they turned around as they try to enter. They're killing not just taxi cab industry, but other industries as well. And those decisions, if it looks like there's no one in charge, no one really. There's federal police and the KGB in charge, and the Russian Federal Migration Service. They have orders from the top that definitely don't go well with the economy. Okay, and then many top economists in Russia, pro-Kremlin, pro-Putin, they have voiced concerns, saying, "What are you doing? Why? Who's going to work?" It's bad enough that 3 million people have left Russia since the start of the war. The best of the best, the cream of the crop, the educated, the ones who have self-confidence, the ones who believe that they can make it anywhere outside Russia, those who have guts, they're the best. They are the the tax revenue generators. They create companies, they create products. They're the engine of the economy. They left. Now you're kicking out the migrants. What are you doing? So, Jonathan, again, I say the same thing. Chaos. Russia is descending into chaos. What are they going to do with taxi cabs? Well, with taxi business, I don't know. Imagine so many drivers at the press of a button stop working. The prices for taxi cabs kind of skyrocket. There will be shortages of taxi cabs, obviously. And the thing is, Russia does not offer an alternative as public transportation. Right now, there is public transportation in every city and town in Russia. But that's changing. There are big problems because there are no drivers to drive buses, because there are no spare parts, because there's simply no money to buy gas for buses. Rostov-on-Don is in the middle of the biggest public transportation crisis right now. Many people walk and they take cabs because they can't catch bus. City of Lvov in July, third of bus routes were canceled because the administration, the local government doesn't have money to subsidize any longer. And other big cities also following the suit. The fuel crisis. What will buses be running on? Okay, if there's no diesel fuel. So anyway, chaos. Russia and Russian people are facing economic chaos, and you know what? It'll start as economic chaos, and it'll spread into general chaos. That's how I forecast.
And of course, we would dispel the myth that somehow this would be a structured political response to the chaos, but it would be chaos and it would be pretty nasty as well. And we see some of that emerging, which is veterans of the SVO, as they call it, in propagandistic terms. We see veterans of the special military operation returning, often well, often these are people who would be have a criminal background in the first place, but even if they don't, they're coming back with an extremely warped sense of right and wrong. They're coming back with all sorts of PTSD, trauma, psychological trauma. And we just had the case in St. Petersburg. Now, we're used to covering this in the provinces. You know, you expect some guy to go back to a village somewhere and massacre everybody, and no one pays that attention because, unfortunately, that's the way things are. But here you had apparently a very prominent St. Petersburg architect shot directly outside his apartment in front of his child by a neighbor who'd returned from the war. I mean, we're going to be seeing more and more of this, not just in the provinces, but actually in the large cities as well. It is truly terrifying.
Jonathan, this is one of Russia's dark secrets that is hidden right now. It actually started right after the start of the war. While I still was in Rostov in the summer of 2022, there was a horrendous case, and was the first case, and it made public because no one knew at the time how to handle it. So all the media picked up the story of how, however we call this people, a veteran. I can't call them veterans. You know, the former
It's too much
soldiers.
normalization, isn't it? I
Yeah,
mean,
too much.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So former
war
soldier, he
criminals, man.
came to Rostov, and he was taking a taxi cab ride, and the cabbie was talking to him and said that, asking questions about the war, and then the cab driver told him that he didn't support the war. Okay, was very much against it. So the guy, without thinking much, took out a knife and finished the guy right off. Okay, and it was a shocking case. And after that, and after a few more cases like that, and they started popping up here and there very, very, very rapidly. After that, Russian propaganda came out with a rule how to report on such cases and how to not report. And basically, right now, they're trying not to report. That St. Petersburg murder was high profile. They couldn't really hide it that much. I'm just going to tell you of a recent case that happened in Rostov-on-Don. Former soldier came back from the war. Um, he was seeing a minor, a girl. He grabbed her, and she ended up. They found her dead a couple hours later, and the guy was caught red-handed. Okay, no one reports on that. That happened right next to Rostov, not too long ago. A cannibal, convicted cannibal, returned to Volgograd, to the village where he had lived before, and he started threatening everyone in village, including relatives of the victim. You understood what he did with that guy, okay? That he's gonna do the same. And this is a wave of darkness that is rising right now, and the more those people, former soldiers, whatever, they come back to Russia, the worse it'll get. Right in 2022, after the start of the war, in Rostov-on-Don, the prices, the quantities of sold security cameras rose significantly because regular people, started buying more and more security cameras. That, I did a report on that like 3.5 years ago. It tells us that people understand and they try to prepare, they try to be ready. From what I understand, in the Kremlin, they also think it's a huge problem. And there are some rumors that people who make decisions don't want those former soldiers come back, because forget about the crime. Crime rate is going to skyrocket. Yeah, that doesn't concern the Kremlin much. But those people, they're very angry. They have seen death. They're very experienced, and they have weapons. That is the force that is really hard to control. And I think that concerns Putin and his friends a lot.
I think so. I mean, we've been talking about this, and I've done some videos on this going back 2 years, suggesting that actually, en masse, they do not want those people to return. Um, and I think there's some evidence that is certainly the case, with the sort of denying leave, denying the ability to sort of return, or even get out of the contracts that have been signed. If we look at the sort of Kontraktniki and so on. And there's just so much going on. We've got a few more minutes left, and I think this also reflects as well what the Ministry of Defense, they essentially, as with administration, you suggested there that really they don't care about the broad implications of crime against people. They're more concerned with their own sort of power and positions. But also the Ministry of Defense, it's been said, treats humans as absolute garbage. We know that from the strategic choices they make, which are very profligate with human lives, very inefficient in military terms. They seem to see human resources as endless and endlessly expendable. That is now coming back to bite them because there is a rising issue of desertion. And Michael Nack did a fantastic piece on this, suggesting that up to 10% of the losses of combat strength are due to desertion, not wounds, not death, etc., but actual people just finding an excuse to either get themselves captured by Ukrainians or disappearing into woods, disappearing into areas, and sort of going off the map and trying to find their way back into Russia and change their identity. I mean, that's a huge problem. 10% of combat strength is enormous, and it makes it harder because then you have to go and try and contract more people, pay more money out. You have to possibly look at a new round of mobilization if you can't stem that tide of desertion.
Um, there are rumors, definitely rumors. There are some experts, including Michael Naki, who come up with numbers. The Ministry of Defense of Russia doesn't confirm anything. How can I say? The Ministry of Defense in Russia does it even exist? From what I understand, there's also some kind of a chaos in the military leadership because the Minister of Defense, he didn't serve one day in the army. Okay, he's the former Gosplan economist, former Putin advisor. Now, he was made the Minister of Defense 18 months ago. We haven't heard from him ever since. He's disappeared. Where is he? I've seen him 2 or 3 times in the news, and that was it. When the Ukrainians moved into Kursk province, he was so scared sitting next to Putin when they were assessing the situation that the camera didn't even show his face. He's terrified. Well, he's not the military guy. Now, the generals, you're saying that they treat humans inhumanly. I don't think they care much. All they care is to remain at their jobs. That's their goal. Okay, and they demand certain results, and I take it the results are moving to like further into Ukraine from the lower rank commanders, and they give commanders all the power to do whatever they want to do, and there we have it, the Russian army. This is the whole country is descending into chaos, and Russian army is also part of that chaos, part of that process. Okay, um, there is definitely something rising on the horizon because obviously they're running out of people very, very fast. Uh, you know, something that we both should be looking at is some provinces are increasing bonuses, sign up bonuses for signing military contracts, and some are decreasing at the same time. For example, Tatarstan decreased by 5 times and made it the bare minimum, 400,000 rubles instead of 2.9 million. Okay, so This is a very, very interesting process going on, and I think this is a forerunner of something big that will happen in Russia until the end of the year. It could be a black swan event. Let's keep our eyes open, and I certainly am monitoring the situation. So, chaos.
So there could be some regions trying to exercise a little bit of, pull away, as it were, and prevent the sort of flood of people from their territories from getting called up. I mean, it's interesting that you'd have that kind of divergence when supposedly you've got a monolithic dictatorship sort of telling everyone what to do, and yet you've got this sort of diversion of politics or policy, which is really curious. And it also seems that the regime is stepping up internal repression. We've seen a number of convictions. We've seen the first conviction since the Soviet period of a play. Playwright and producer, I think, had just been sort of sent to jail. And we're seeing a ratcheting up of external repression as well. So Khodorkovsky's just been charged with terrorism. We have under the Soldata, Venerina Baragan, their status has gone up a level. And so you're seeing here the Kremlin sort of lashing out in all directions. Again, maybe this is a signal of a certain desperation.
I think so. I think this is a signal of desperation. And the thing is, lately, we start seeing multiple signals. Vladimir Putin flying to the Central Asia summit and getting humiliated by the president, Azerbaijan President Aliyev.
I was going to ask you
Um,
about that. That's almost a unique, where Putin has apologized or semi-apologized and semi-admitted some kind of guilt and promised some kind of, compensation there. That I haven't seen him do that before.
Vladimir Putin hates to apologize, but he hates even more to be humiliated, and he was humiliated. Okay, and basically, he's the one who self-humiliated by asking Azerbaijan president for forgiveness. He said that he did not do that before because he was only informed of the truth of what happened with the plane days before going to the Central Asian summit. Well, perhaps he's very inadequate, unprofessional manager, the president, and he needs to resign right away, okay? Because his own servants keep truth away from him. That's not good. In business, that's enough to get you fired if you are a C-level executive and
Mm.
you report to a CEO and you say, "Well, look, I'm sorry, but the data that I was giving you for 9 months is wrong because my employees didn't provide me. I didn't know. I just called them a couple of days ago and I
It's
got
not
the
a
truth." And
defense
basically, this
either.
is
If you're a
this is what.
CEO and you use that excuse, you're gone because, as you say,
Yes,
it's not an excuse. You're the director, and
that's a
you
fatal
carry the
mistake.
can.
That's what
Yeah,
it is.
yeah.
Yes, that's one sign. What you said about this big ordeal going on right now, Russian state is outlawing everyone who is who in Russian opposition based abroad. Well, this is a sign of weakness because they feel that finally they are so weak that this opposition actually can move, can do things, can take actions. Okay, before they felt um, untouchable. Now they feel that situation is changing. For 18 months, well, for probably 2.5 years, this group of people, more or less, was together. They met regularly in Europe, in other countries. They discussed, they had a summit, I don't remember, a year and a half ago, perhaps, where, they had a fight inside. And it was okay. They were not criminals back then. And Russian government didn't find them threat. Now it understands its positions, Putin's positions are much weaker, and they are making their lives of this opposition so much more difficult. Definitely a sign of weakness.
It is kind of extraordinary, isn't it? And, the last question, and this is one which we struggle because we've got a great deal of wishful thinking here. We've talked about the fault lines, we've talked about points of resistance to the regime, we've talked about what they see as a threat. Fundamentally, there is still the case that the riches, the mineral resources and riches that are powering Putin's war machine, these are not dug out of the ground in Moscow where power resides. They're dug up in areas which are either have a majority of indigenous people or have a high proportion of the population or a large amount of indigenous people. Many of these are struggling to survive. They don't see any of the riches and benefits of what could be a very powerful economy. Of course, we would love to think that there's this fairy tale ending where they secede off and the riches start to really accumulate to the people in whose regions they are based. This unfortunately still feels like something of a fantasy that the FSB is still strong enough to keep a hold of it. There's too little let's say, sort of strong local regional identity to resist central power in Moscow. So, yes, chaos is coming, but what are the chances of it leading to a fragmentation or justice for indigenous peoples? I still feel fairly pessimistic, actually, about that.
Pessimistic in terms of Russia is not going to break apart,
It's
or
not going to
what is
break
your
apart in
pessimism?
a fair fashion that liberates all the people who are subjugated by by central hierarchical power emanating from Moscow.
Jonathan, you don't have to break Russia apart to liberate people. Okay, that can be done in different ways. Russia is a federation. Okay, it's just the federation on paper. It doesn't work. This federation doesn't work as federation in reality. All you need to do is to make it real federation, and a federation means that people on the ground in the provinces in different parts of Russia, they have so much more power than they have now. Okay, that's one way out. Will Russia break apart? Will things change drastically? Will freedoms return to Russia? Will people take back freedoms that have been taken from them? No one can tell right now. I mean, this is I certainly cannot forecast anything. Okay, I know that there are paths, different paths, and there are probabilities of each path. Which one is going to be taken by the country? That I don't know. Um, it's not looking good for Russia right now. Um, the KGB is all powerful. Putin's regime seems very strong. But let me remind you, the Soviet Union looked very, very strong on August 17th of 1991. And on August 23rd, it did not exist. Okay. I'm seeing more and more parallels from between now and 1991. And Russia may fall apart. Well, not, I shouldn't say Russia, the Putin's regime might fall apart. So many points of pressure mounting right now. And if there's one event, I call it Black Swan event, okay? One event that creates disturbance in the country, it might trigger all other, pressure points, and there will be fire that will consume Russia in 1 day, 2 days, very, very, very quickly. Again, I'm guessing. I don't know. What I can definitely tell is that there's tremendous economic decline right now, and economy is the foundation of any country. Okay, there is tremendous, there are tremendous troubles in Russian army, and Russian in the army is always force to deal with. Okay, there is a tremendous political crisis in Russian leadership because Putin is cornered. He doesn't really have he doesn't have a way out. He tried to play the Trump card for some time, but he failed. Okay, his economy is falling apart. Army is falling apart. It's not moving anywhere. The only way out he has right now, well, it's actually not even a way out. A way to prolong his power is to tighten the screws in Russia, to descend Iron Curtain, to ban Russians from leaving the country, just like it was done in the USSR, to call up another mobilization or to call up the reserves, the reservists into army. There are different ways. So he needs to escalate domestically. He cannot escalate, at least I don't see possible ways of escalating, abroad, like starting the war with Europe, because at this point he doesn't have much resources. Now, there could be an exception of the Baltic states, and we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. Okay, we're still waiting for that situation to develop. I'm keeping my eyes open. But other than that, he doesn't have resources. He had to go and beg for forgiveness from Azerbaijan president because he can't afford two fronts. And it seemed like Azerbaijan was opening the second front, albeit was just informational, but it was also supplying, as a symbol, it was supplied some jets to Ukraine, things like that. So Putin had to step over himself and close that front. Okay, so I see that an incredible pressure is mounting everywhere, and it cannot. The Putin's regime and Putin himself, they cannot hold for forever. I mean, I see cracks already happening in the vertical of power, and it all starts with one small crack, and then it
That's it.
just
Yeah.
widens, and the chasm, and an event happens, a black swan event, and then everything falls apart in days. The USSR fell apart just like that, and I think that Putin's Russia will fall apart just like the USSR did.
And it's the same, through history. You've got 1913, when 300 years of the Romanov dynasty was being celebrated, and a huge investment in sort of celebration there. And generally, if you try to describe to someone in 1913 that within 4 years all of that would be swept away, they would have thought you were mad. They wouldn't have believed you. And I think we may be closer now to such an event, in weeks, months, maybe years away, but we are close to another such cataclysm of sorts, or a change that is much needed. Konstantin, that's probably a good place to wrap it up. We've covered a lot of, I think, really interesting kind of topics here, and hopefully sort of brought that together in some kind of a synthesis. Thank you so much for everything that you do, helping to shed light on what is going on in the Russian economy. And thank you for coming back on to help explain that to the audience. I know it is greatly appreciated.
Jonathan, thank you very much for having me. It's very intellectually pleasing to speak with you. Fantastic. I hope we do that again in the future in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can guarantee that. For today, thanks so much. Before we move on to the next question, I'd like to make a personal recommendation that I know you will appreciate. You may have seen my interview last week with the producer of the film series Kyiv of Mine, Ronnie Apteker. Well, I've partnered with them to help raise awareness of what I believe is an important series of films made for a Western audience to help break through absurd stereotypes about Ukraine, some of which, of course, are amplified by Russian propaganda. You can watch these films for free now. Details in a second. Kyiv of Mine is a documentary series about Ukraine's extraordinary capital, which I had the privilege to visit for the first time in January this year. The film production began in 2018, and of course much has changed since then. It's now 2025, and the story is far from over. Kyiv of Mine is a fast-paced, beautifully filmed, humorous, fun, insightful, heartbreaking, moving, and hopeful work, the very antithesis, in fact, of a doom-laden and worthy wartime documentary. This is a work that is extraordinarily uplifting. My friend Operator Starsky says the film is made with so much love. The film series will make you laugh and cry. It's the only film about Ukraine that began before the war yet has traced lives through the tumultuous times, and which follows the lives of more than a dozen Ukrainians in real time. This is an historic period told through highly personal and emotive stories from Kyiv's days of emerging prosperity after the Maidan Revolution through COVID and the full-scale invasion. This film is a breath of fresh air. Ukraine deserves a better conversation in the world, one that isn't centered around war, says Julian Ellis, filmmaker on Kyiv of Mine. It's hard not to argue with that, and the filmmakers have fully delivered on this promise. This is essential watching for anyone who calls themselves pro-Ukrainian, but I think it's also vital to get friends, colleagues, and family to watch it too, because the reality is few people have a vivid impression of Ukraine or any direct connection with its people. War is inhumane and abstract. Building an alternative perception is essential for engaging the world with the importance of Ukraine's struggle. A final word from our partners, the makers of Kyiv of Mine. All three films are now available to watch for free on YouTube. Please check out the links to the dedicated website, which tells you more about the film, its subjects, and the filmmakers. Also in the description is a link to the YouTube channel where you can watch the films now. Do let us know in the comments what you think of them and if they inspire you as much as they have inspired me.